was trying to be in a good mood that day. From the morning, as soon as he entered the building of the school where he worked, he was joking and smiling from ear to ear. It was weird because, famously, he's a stiff and loner. He was rather unfamiliar with other teachers, and the students preferred to stay out of his way. The math teacher knew how to effectively subdue students who could not submit to his rules. They were simple. There was to be a perfect silence in the classroom, and the only person who could speak was the student being questioned. Each prank ended with a quiz or a huge amount of extracurricular tasks. That is why the students of the school preferred to spend 60 minutes in peace rather than sit with their nose in a notebook and solve additional tasks for many hours. But that day, Joe was completely different. He did not sit at the table in the corner of the staff room as usual. Among others, he was considered a weirdo. It was even more surprising that the man was so cheerful and excited. He brought cookies for refreshments, sat down with the others, engaged in discussions on almost every topic. The students also noticed a change in his behavior. During math class, the man joked and allowed the students a little more freedom. He didn't even ask anything that day, which was surprising in itself. Right after school, Joe rushed home. He had an appointment for a chat that day. He didn't want to be late because it was an important moment for him. He was supposed to have a guest tonight. He was about to fulfill the greatest fantasy of his life. Something he had dreamed of for years was about to come true. The man returned home and logged onto one of the portals for people looking for a same-sex partner. Steve was already waiting for him. Steve was a construction worker. He has been working in Paris for several months. He was an electrician by profession. A well-paid job allowed him to lead a quiet life. He was single and didn't have many expenses. He spent his free time traveling or visiting gay clubs. He was like that himself. Although he never committed to anyone for a long time, he still dreamed of great love. He believed that love was waiting for him, and despite the fact that he is already 53 years old, he may still be a man in love. He had high hopes for Joe. They met on the portal and rode practically every day. The dream day has finally arrived. They were both supposed to meet. On August 10, 2018, shortly before midnight, Steve left the apartment and went on a date. Days, weeks, and months pass. Steve disappeared. Nobody had contact with him. Nobody knew where he was. He did not show up for work and did not return to his employer's rented apartment to collect his belongings. Concerned about this fact, colleagues reported the disappearance to the police. The police accepted the report. The man's mother was found, who could not say much. The son went to the capital to work and stayed there. He had almost no contact with his mother, so she herself did not know what was going on with her own son. His associates could tell more about the missing person. It was a group of people from all over Europe: Italians, Hungarians, and Poles. Everyone was an electrician by profession. They were employed by a company that organized long-term trips. Huge cabling complexes meant that the whole group spent sometimes even many weeks in one place. The employer rented a house and paid very well for every hour worked. The profession of electrician or welder in France has its price, and work on assembly brings additional financial bonuses. But that wasn't important now. One of the employees was missing. There was no indication that he had changed his mind and quit his job. He left all his personal belongings at home. This is not the behavior of a man who plans not to return. Police initially assumed that the roommates might have had a hand in the disappearance. Everyone was questioned thoroughly and the house was searched. However, nothing has been revealed. There was no trace found to suggest that any crime had taken place here. In addition, a group of several men never caused any problems. Among the neighbors, they were considered calm and helpful. Sometimes they fixed something on their own initiative, didn't drink, and didn't make noise. Therefore, investigators quickly abandoned this direction of search. Specialists also secured the missing man's computer, but there was nothing in it that could suggest what really happened. This device was only used for gaming and watching movies. Steven's phone has stopped logging since the day he disappeared. There were not many outgoing and incoming calls. Most of his conversations were via instant messaging, so it was impossible to read them. The search continued, but with each passing month, the police became less involved. All mortuaries, hospitals, detention centers, and airports were checked. There was no sign of Stephen anywhere. He also did not withdraw any money from the account. On December 12, 2019, in one of the parks, a man walking his dog suddenly lost sight of his pet. He called to him, but the dog was interested in some find. After a while, the dog's owner noticed the dog dragging the bone behind him. There were pieces of meat on it. The man decided to inform the police. The report concerned the discovery of the bones of some animal. The meat on it worried the man because, as he rightly assumed, it can be a serious threat to animals and, above all, people. Entire families were often in the park, and no parent would want their child to touch such things. The patrol arrived on the scene, and the find electrified the officers. It was not an animal bone, but a human one. The area was secured, and forensic technicians and forensic experts were sent to the site. When the technician inspected the bone exposure site, the physician determined that it was a femur. It wasn't hard to figure out. The femur is the heaviest and longest bone in the human skeleton. It measures about 30% of the total body length and is very distinctive. Officers checked the area but found nothing else. Apparently, some game brought the bones to the park earlier, and the dog just found them. However, laboratory studies have yielded groundbreaking findings, for there were traces of human teeth on the bone. Someone bit her. This made the matter take on a completely different meaning. The park was searched again, and this time more remains were found. The body, the limbs, everything lay hidden in the brush, hidden from the walkers. It was determined that the body had been dismembered using specialized tools. In addition, tooth marks were revealed on other parts. Since then, the investigation into the murder case has been conducted. A guide with a tracking dog was sent to the place, who, to the surprise of the gathered, took up the trail. Through the streets of the district, the dog led to one of the houses. He spun around a few times and entered the gate. He sniffed the ground for a long time, then briskly walked up the stairs to the first floor of the building. He stopped at a wooden door leading to one of the apartments. The investigators knocked. You could hear someone inside, but no one opened the door. It wasn't until the officers threatened to break down the door that someone approached. He looked through the viewfinder for a moment. After a moment, he opened the lock. A moment later, in another lock, the resident turned the key. The door opened ajar, and the investigators turned out to be surprised by the visit of a man, short and fat, dressed in white pants. Surprised, he asked what it was about. The police officer explained that they had suspicions that a crime had taken place in this apartment and wanted to conduct a search. The man denied it and demanded a warrant. However, the police do not always need a search warrant to do so. The law allows searches of residential and business premises for a police ID card. This is usually the case in urgent cases where there is a high probability that by the time investigators need to obtain a warrant, the offender will have obliterated all traces of his offense. Then, in accordance with the law, a police officer may carry out a search, and the basis for this is his service ID. Of course, the person at whom this procedural act is performed also has its rights. After such a search, the police officer must apply to the prosecutor for approval of the action. If the prosecutor decides that the police officer had no grounds for doing so, then he will draw consequences. The need to approve the activities means that each officer of the criminal division must perfectly justify their activities, which will not raise any doubts that it was simply impossible to do otherwise. In addition, anyone against whom the police conducts procedural activities, including a search, has the right to lodge a complaint against such activities. That is why it is worth knowing that every police officer is obliged to inform us about the rights and obligations we have. Investigators entered the apartment and began questioning Joe. The teacher denied having anything to do with Stephen's disappearance. In addition, he claimed that he did not know such a man and had never met him. Technicians searched the apartment. In the kitchen, a set of surgical tools was found in one of the cupboards. Among them was a bone saw and knives. Some still had blood on them. A tank filled with hydroxide was found in the bathroom. The man could not explain the origin and purpose of these things. When investigators found traces of blood and human bones in the refrigerator, Joe declined to comment further. The man was detained and the tools and suspicious items secured in the house were sent for analysis. Her result left little doubt. The blood was Stephen's, but that wasn't the only evidence linking the two men. Many conversations were found on the detained man's computer. They conducted them in a chat room for single people looking for a partner of the same sex. The message made it clear that the two were supposed to meet on the day they disappeared. There were no further conversations, which allowed to assume that Joe knew that his colleague would not write back. Joe then decided to change his testimony. Now he claimed to have actually had contact with Stephen. He met him online and the two arranged to meet. During the conversation, they ran out of wine, so the host went to the store to buy a bottle. When he returned, he found a dead body. The man was lying on the bed and gave no signs of life. Then Joe was afraid that when he called for help, the whole truth about his orientation would come to light, and as a consequence he might lose his job. So he decided to get rid of the body. He dismembered them and dumped them in the park. The prosecutor, however, did not believe these explanations. Evidence seized at the scene proved otherwise. A number of clues combined into one whole, and when we add the evidence to it, we can reconstruct the probable course of those events. Around 10 p.m., the men arranged to meet. It was supposed to take place at Stephen's apartment. It is not known whether there was a rapprochement between them, but certainly at some point the host attacked his guest. What happened next? Given that investigators discovered the culprit of the cannibalism website in the browser history, we can assume that Joe wanted to eat Stephen. Were they both aware of this, and did they just agree on it, like in the case of the famous Armin Mace case? We don't know, but probably not. Nothing came of the conversation between them. Probably murdered him, then deprived him of his member. We know because the evidence shows that the perpetrator ate it. Teeth marks on the bones indicate that other parts also tried. It was also established that the hydroxide was used to dissolve bones and tissues, and Joe was planning, in fact, already started soap production. Afterwards, he disposed of the body in the park and started a new relationship online. The perpetrator maintained his innocence until the end. He claimed that he did not murder, but only desecrated the corpse. Although to the water they pointed to something completely different, he remained adamant. The case of the cannibal from Paris stirred public opinion. In the school where Joe taught, it was discussed whether it was his first such crime. There was no end to the rumors and speculations, but the police never confirmed that there had been similar murders before. The trial soon began. The prosecutor presented evidence that did not raise any doubts as to the guilt of the accused. Therefore, a few days later, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of applying for parole. After the case was over, some people wondered why such crimes were happening. Why are so many people interested in cannibalism in one country? The media also recalled a case from 2011 when a policeman was detained after he murdered a man he wanted to eat. This case, described today, resonated widely throughout Europe. Experts ask themselves how many such degenerates operate with impunity in the country, or maybe all over Europe. After all, every year many people die in every country who are never found. Did some of them become the cannibal's main dish? We'll probably never know that. Thank you for listening to this scary story. Next episode coming soon. Stay tuned and take care of yourselves.